Okay.
Okay, for Dinesh, we got a question.
Go.
What is the thing that makes
Steve? Am I the only one who can't hear him?
I can hear Steve.
Yes. Yeah, you're the only one, Andrew.
What? I can hear Dinesh.
Well, Dinesh has a question. In your opinion, the thing that makes clusters spin up quick?
Okay. So I think K3s has this reputation that is undeserved in what it is, which is that it's for only IoT devices, it's for really, really small things, and it's not production graded and it's not production ready. 4 years ago, I think that was the case. What K3s was doing was pulling a lot of in-tree code out of Kubernetes using patches and then releasing a distribution of Kubernetes that was smaller and lighter weight. But as upstream Kubernetes has been pulling more and more of these bits of code out with things like the storage interface, that has become less and less true. So I think K3s now is almost identical to upstream Kubernetes, but what they've done is they've wrapped a hell of a lot around bootstrapping and node joining, which is really, really useful and why we're still using it in part. But Talos has replaced all of that as well, because they have also got the same things about managing clusters and node joining as well. So it's been a drop in replacement. Speed has been hardware and design choices that we've made, and we've been really focused on speed. So I think that thing I said about tightly coupling hardware and software is where we're getting the speed out.
Cool. Node Autoscaler has Civo support, but only managed control plane. Do you have a plan to unlock
it? We do have Autoscaler support. I'm not entirely sure I understand the question around plan to unlock the control plane or something. So we do have a completely managed control plane. It's completely hidden. There are no plans for us to kind of give end users access to that. We used to do it. We then found people spinning up one node clusters with control plane and workload and running an entire Prometheus stack on a machine with 0.5 gig of RAM and 1 CPU core, and then raising a support ticket that everything's broken. So we stopped doing that. And, we then have a managed control plane that always is up, always listening to API responses. And then if the customer makes a node not ready, that's their problem, not a support problem for us. But yeah, the plan will be to continue to have a managed control plane that is ours to run and manage.
Yeah, funny enough, I think every other week we get a support request in Slack, things don't work, and it turns out people try to run Kubernetes control plane on a 1 gig of RAM node.
Yes.
And Kubernetes, unfortunately, doesn't give any good feedback on that. It just fails to start all components, and that's it.
I think Talos gives you feedback on that node though now, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. We try to put it in the health CLI. We put it in the kernel log, but still
people don't read it.
Yeah.
There's only so many foot guns you can prevent, right?
Right.
The question there on Autoscaler for the control plane just workers. So because it's a managed control plane, we actually autoscale the control planes in the back end. And depending on the amount of total RAM available in the cluster, we will scale the control plane up and down to match the amount of workload. But again, that's something that we take care of in the back end, but our autoscaler doesn't need to expose that.
Yep. And there's a question: are we planning on publishing the Sidero roadmap? That's a bit of an ambiguous question, because we have Sidero Metal as a product or Sidero a company.
Answer to both.
I guess the answer could be yes.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
I guess the answer is both yes.
Roadmaps are hard, as I said in my thing, right? Like Dinesh, I'm sure you know this. You can have all kinds of elaborate plans but when you really think about it, a whole year out it's a long time in our space. But we will definitely publish it and try to make it happen.
Yeah. I mean,
something else happened.
Yeah, we tried to plan an entire year one time, and it didn't go that well.
Yeah, something will happen. It may or may not be related to what we publish. The likelihood is much more closer in the next release than in the one that it happens in 9 months or a year from now.
Right.
So for clarification, it was publishing what Andrew talked about this morning, which is Sidero as a company, Sidero Labs.
Yeah,
as a company,
and
I think so.
I'm sure we'll put that somewhere official as a document or whatever, but it's also going to be published as a video too, for whatever that's worth.
Sounds like Andrew gets to write a blog.
Oh, I'm so excited.
For Talos upgrades, is running Talos CTL upgrade on each node sequentially without gaps enough to do this safely? As always, it depends.
Yep.
Well,
pretty
Yeah,
much.
I mean, so let's just
it's
take
tricky.
Yeah, Andre, go ahead if you want.
No, I mean, Talos takes care basically so that you can't run upgrades on all control plane nodes at once. Basically, it makes sure that etcd quorum will stay intact, right? But in general, it has no idea about your workloads on the worker nodes. So from Talos' point of view, you can upgrade all workers at once simultaneously. But what will happen to your workloads in that case, that's an open question. And I think Andrew has a great example for Rook Ceph.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, you know, this is a common question that comes up in the classic example that we give is when you're running Rook Ceph, you have to be sure that Rook Ceph is healthy before you move on. That's something that so far we've left up to users to figure out, but we've long been talking, I know I wouldn't necessarily put this in the roadmap, but we've been long talking about hooks and different ways that we can actually help teach Talos about which workloads it should wait for to be healthy before some operator, which will most likely be an Omni, goes out and just, you know, blows away your whole cluster and without knowing about the workload. But, you know, as Steve said, it depends, right? And that's mostly because workloads are hard to predict. But for the ones that we can, like Rook Ceph and whatnot, we have some ideas.
Yeah.
And also, like, to clarify that, it's not that you can reboot, like, if the upgrades are not quite as reboots, right? You can reboot all your nodes. Yes, like, at the moment of the reboot, all your workloads will go down, but they will recover. But what Talos does by default on upgrade, it tries to reset the node back to the initial state. So it will wipe the contents of the /var partition. And some workloads which use /var to store data might not be happy about that. For example, Rook Ceph, it stores all your actual data on, like, usually on other disks, but it stores some internal metadata in /var, and it does something which is close to what etcd does with quorum. So if you wipe a single node, no big deal, Rook Ceph will recover from that. But if you wipe like 2 nodes at once, Rook Ceph won't be happy anymore about it.
I don't know if there's more questions for Dinesh, or if Dinesh, if you're happy to hang out, but if you have time, other things you need to do, we don't want to take you up unduly, but you're more than welcome to hang out and be one of the gang.
I think
There's one more. Yeah, there's one more Dinesh question. What was the most fiddly part of architecting how to provision your servers with Talos?
Disk
technical term, fiddly.
Yeah, disk partitioning, which I think I've got an open conversation with Andrew about, and the about Talos needing the entirety of the first disk to install. In some of our regions that we've deployed, we actually have 2 boot disks that are smaller and then 2 data disks. In some of our later regions, we only have 2 4 terabyte NVMEs installed on every server. So a bit more of a challenge when Talos takes up an entirety of 4 terabytes of a data disk. But I know, Andrew, we're talking about that, so that might change at some point.
I mean, for what it's worth, we're talking to many people about that because it's a common
recurring.
Yeah, definitely.
One quick point. Andre asked, do we offer the latest Kubernetes version? Yes, Talos always comes with the latest version of Kubernetes. Yeah. What you may be thinking about, something that's 9 months old, the latest version of Talos supports the latest version of Kubernetes, plus the ones that are released in the last 9 months. So if you try and run an older version of Kubernetes on the current, most recent version of Talos, then that isn't technically supported. But Talos always comes with the most recent Kubernetes, the most recent stable Linux kernel, and the most recent Talos.
It
I
may
would
have
say
also
having-
just. Sorry, go ahead, Dinesh.
I would just say it does work more often than you think. I definitely have a Talos cluster running with 121 Kubernetes somewhere in the depths of our testing environment that
Not
works
supported.
better than you think. But it's not supported, but it does. It works.
Yeah.
Spencer, you were going to say something?
No, I was BSing about it. May have just been us hating on everyone else too, and having old Kubernetes deploy or Kubernetes versions.
Aaron has a good question about Sidero and Omni being a single point of failure. How do we overcome that?
Yes, that is true right now, and we're hoping to get better about it. Honestly, in the longer term, what you hit, Aaron, was probably this really nasty upstream cert manager bug that we hit a couple weeks back. That decided to invalidate all of our certs, which was real fun. But yes, it's a known issue, and it's a thing that we are actively working to do better at.
Yeah, I mean, that's the nature of a SaaS too, right? Is especially when you got something like Kubernetes and Omni's in the hot path, so to speak. But the good news is that this is really just external Kubernetes access. So if you lose Omni entirely, then you lose management. But if the load balancer for your Kubernetes cluster, for example, is down, it's at least limited.
And to add on that a little bit more, sorry, Steve.
Omni being down should not affect your workloads.
Yeah.
And we're also sorry. Yeah.
No, we're good. I must have delay, I think. No, go ahead.
I mean, I just wanted to say, when we say single point of failure, we assume that Omni might fail hard, that it can be recovered or something like that. Like you have running your Postgres database as a single instance and you lose that. But Omni itself is technically stateless, right? It doesn't have all the Omni state is stored externally. And in terms of our SaaS, it's stored in etcd, which runs in multiple replicas. And we do take care of backups and stuff like that. So if Omni itself as a process dies, it will be simply rescheduled and we'll start back. Usually it's something around Omni which fails, like the cert manager stuff, right? Which we're certainly going to look at, fix and stuff like that. But it's not a single point of failure in the sense that you can lose it completely.
Yeah.
I will drop off. I think the
Yes.
chat has
Thank you, Dinesh.
questions. But yes, thank you again. Great conference.
Great talk.
I'm loving it.
Thanks, Dinesh.
Take care.
Any plans to extend Metal with the vSphere API? Well, I'd say no, because that's just a cluster API provider that works in a CAPI management cluster, and you can also plug in the Sidero Metal CAPI provisioner.
I don't really see that. Yeah, I don't see us changing that. I mean, I guess there's some interesting things you could do around, like, you could actually pixie boot a VM and like join it to Sidero Metal and stuff. Like, you could do some things like that inside of vSphere, but it would be more manual than you'd want. And yeah, I think you're probably best served continuing to use the vSphere cluster API provider, I would think.
There are some.
Or Omni.
Or Omni. Obviously, we're gonna.
Yeah, I mean, Omni's better than everything else. Just
There's also, I believe, Tremor Video is doing something kind of cool, where they actually spin up VMs that are managed by Sidero Metal. They have some like BMC virtualization in front of it. So although they are VMs, you can actually manage them with Sidero Metal.
Is that in VMware? Do we know? I can't remember.
I believe it is. Yeah.
But yeah, they're using virtual BMC, I think, for that. Which is cool. Yeah. Actually, that's a good question. Ask BJ later on today.
Yeah, they're giving a talk in 2 and 3 hours. 3 hours from now. So.
And BJ just said, yeah,
it's interesting. Instead of using like infrastructure native VMware provider, using Sidero Metal because it's more fun, it's easier to do.
I mean, it makes sense too, right? Because I believe they're also using Sidero Metal for like bare metal, and it's just a nice unified way of looking at everything. If it's a VM, fine. If it's not, whatever. It's kind of cool.
Omni hosted control plane pricing, we don't know because we haven't built them yet. So we don't exactly know how it's going to work.
When they'll be available, I mean, I would like to see this sooner rather than later. Obviously, priorities.
We got an overpromise coming in hot here.
There's a lot of things we'd like to see sooner.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, a healthy guess would be anywhere from like the 6 to 9 month range. I would say definitely late summer or later. There's some work to be done there for sure.
There's also a cluster API question. Is there a reason why bootstrapping the first cluster node is not part of the cluster API implementation? I'm not sure if that's about Sidero Metal, but you can technically install Sidero Metal or any other Sidero Labs cluster API providers to any Kubernetes cluster. There's no dependency on that. So that initial cluster can be provisioned with anything, including cluster API itself, if there is. Looking for more inception, like cluster API and cluster API, it works.
Yeah, looking into the thread, I'm a little more confused about Eric's question because it looks like he's got Cappy running inside of a kind cluster, but it's not bootstrapping maybe his workload cluster. Eric, that should happen. But yeah, you may just, it's going to be checking some logs and things like that. There's something wrong. But
check
should be.
If that's Sidero Metal, by the way, if that's Sidero Metal running inside the kind cluster, that is Sidero Metal nowadays requires connection from the workload machine back to the management cluster. So there might be some more ports which need to be exposed with kind before this will work.
Yeah. Yep. Not sure how
that
kind can come up.
Basically, Sidero Metal tries to learn what is the machine IP address, and as this bare metal, and there is no like really cloud API to figure out how network is set up, Sidero Metal relies on Talos to report back what are the node addresses, machine addresses at the moment. And that is required to bootstrap the cluster because Sidero Metal will talk back to the Talos API. It needs to know the machine address.
All right.
We've got 2 minutes left, but this seems like a good 1 minute left. This seems like a good Andre question real quick. Do you envision breaking changes from Talos 1.x to an eventual 2.x? Any guarantees for upgrade paths in the future?
Well, so far, when we transition from 0x to 1x, I believe our machine config is always backwards compatible, so you can kind of upgrade endlessly. I haven't tried that, but in theory, you can, I don't know, start with 0.8 Talos and upgrade it all the way to 1.4, and it will keep running same way. We have sometimes there is like...
It's going to be safe to say that Talos 1.x, whatever that highest x is, will have a clean migration to 2.
Yeah. Talos 1.0. There would definitely be a migration. Technically, if you're talking being pedantic about the semantic versioning, the major versions do indicate backwards incompatibilities. That being said, we've done an excellent job since like long before you should be running Talos in production in ensuring backwards compatibility. Thanks to Andre. I mean, that's been one of his priorities.
The other session.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I'll hang out here for 30 more seconds.
Yeah.
Or maybe we hang out here for a couple of minutes. We're good.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say let's probably start wrapping up here, and maybe after the Omni launch, we can stick around, or or Andrew and I can stick around or something. I know it's getting late for Andre already. Yeah, which is fine. But yeah, we'll take some more questions. We can totally do that. Yeah.
I imagine there'll be some random one that we do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
I think machine config is alpha, for example. I can stay around. I can stay around and try.
Yeah, Spencer, feel free.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a question about machine config being alpha. I think it's more of an Andrew's question, but we want to be on the safe side to make sure that we can do breaking changes. But as far as I remember, we never actually did breaking changes. And if there was something like upgrade required additional steps, we'll always have them documented. But it's not that it no longer works. But like there were some big changes, like moving from self-hosted control plane to Talos managed, right?
Yeah.
That required some additional steps. But the machine config, by the way, hasn't changed, right? It's still backwards compatible.
Yep. Another question: will there be someone from our team at KubeCon? Is Tim going? I don't know. We certainly won't have a booth, I believe.
Yeah,
None of
the
our talks
booths
got
like
accepted.
the booth tripled in price on us. So, so
Yeah,
no, we
and
won't
we
be
got
having a
no
booth.
talks accepted. So
Tim says he's not going. So unclear. Sounds like probably not for Amsterdam. But we'll let you know if something changes, I guess.
Yes,
someone says,
the
I think the
challenge.
challenge is applying configs with newer, sorry, Andre, attributes not available in older Talos releases. Something I've seen a few months ago, that these old machines just fail hard and cannot process the config applied. So you have to be careful. Yes.
They shouldn't fail hard, first of all, right? Talos does two things. When you apply config to the running node, it always validates the config before even trying to apply that, right? So, I mean, I'm not sure what failing hard means, but it's not that Talos will be broken. It will just not accept the config. And when you do the upgrade, and that is a relatively recent feature of Talos, Talos also checks the machine config for compatibility. And just
yeah, and it may be a
case,
dance too of like you need to upgrade Talos before you apply the newer config, or like some little dance of getting it right. But
and just
Those
in
are
case,
the-
Talos CTL machinery, like the package which takes care of generating the config, has a way to generate backwards compatible machine configuration. So using like Talos CTL, the current version, you can generate config which will be compatible with 1.0, for example. If you have a fleet of different clusters running different Talos versions, you don't need to carry around Talos CTL of all possible versions. You can use the latest one and just specify that you want config for older Talos. We support anything back to 0.8, which is crazy.
Yeah.
I hope no
Don't
one
say that
still
out
runs
loud.
0.8.
Do
right,
not say
yeah.
that out loud, Spencer. I mean, Andre, do not say that.
This was supposed to be a talk from Brian at Target about how they run Talos in Talos, but he's had some personal issues come up and isn't going to be able to make it. So
I mean, I could touch very quickly and lightly on the topic if people are interested in it. He and I came up with this more or less chatting about it in Slack. He obviously led it, but if people have questions about it, happy to answer. Otherwise, other questions.
Give a brief overview of what they're up to.
Yeah, maybe I'll just let people trickle in a little bit, or
Tim
Steve, you
says
tell me
he-
when to go.
What time is it? We're 30 seconds in. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, do not expect a nice talk from me, but I can, high level talk about what they were doing at Target is basically if you use Cluster API or Sidero Metal more specifically, and you imagine that cluster that is created by that on bare metal as your undercloud, as I've seen some people or in companies call it, where
Whoa.
supporting services, yeah, that brings back some bad memories, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Where you see core services, there's some more bad memories kind of running there, things like NTP and whatnot, that ultimately will provide services to clusters that are running within clusters that are in that cluster. I know, bear with me. So using Sidero Metal, you bootstrap a cluster, and then within that cluster, since Talos, again, you can run the same version of Talos anywhere. I mean, as we've just seen, we've gone from SBCs to Nokia doing very large scale enterprise. I mean, and anything in between with Talos. One thing that wasn't really touched on is that you can actually run Talos as a container, and it's the same exact binary that is Talos. There's some operational differences, like you actually can't run the Talos kernel, obviously, because of Docker or containers depend on your host kernel. But if you use pods within Kubernetes, you can actually form Kubernetes clusters using the Talos container. And so within that bare metal cluster, your overcloud, or whatever else people have called it, is running completely in containers. So people can go in, request a cluster from the platform team, and that's just a bunch of pods running within that bare metal Kubernetes cluster. So that's the high level thing.
Do you know, is that what Civo is doing effectively?
No. And Dinesh is on here. Maybe he can chime in, but they're certainly not doing that. Civo is doing some really cool stuff. I've been super impressed with their engineering. They have controllers for everything, and they're using, I don't know how much I can say, but it's certainly not containers. And I'll leave it to Dinesh to reveal exactly what. There you go. So he's comfortable saying. He's saying they're running libvirt.
Okay.
We don't trust the users. Yes.
Never trust users. It's so much easier without users.
Yep.
So Masood has a question.
That's the high level thing. Yeah.
How can we interact with Talos networking in extensions?
That's a good question. Maybe something better fit for Andre. Andre, you are.
Hold on, your mic's messed up or something. Oh, put your mic down, I think.
We can't hear you.
On your head. Yeah.
Thank you.
That would help.
There we go.
That was easy fix.
No code fix.
But really, that question about interacting with the networking from Talos system extensions, it depends on how deep you want to go. For example, like in the talk from Nokia, Kai was talking about running FRR as a system extension and works perfectly, but it kind of runs in parallel to Talos. So Talos doesn't touch what FRR is doing, and FRR doesn't touch anything Talos, so they just perfectly coexist with each other. If you want to go like more deep and try to integrate more, like provide some features, that's something we were thinking about. And in the next talk, I'll touch slightly on that. But like short answer, we don't have anything right now for it, but we have some thoughts. So if you have some ideas what you would like to do, we're happy to hear that. You know, open like GitHub issue or discussions.
Also,
so we can talk about that.
Also, too, Andre, I mean, if you think about it, once we have multi-doc YAML, there's nothing stopping people from like just creating, like, as we've sort of imagined it out loud together in personal conversations, you can have a route spec. It's just this YAML, this spec that is solely for how to define a route or maybe an interface. But we're still going to we still got some work to figure out the actual UX. But using the APIs internally from a system extension, that thing could just produce those resources, and the controllers can just, work off of those in theory, instead of having an API like we do for devices or disks or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was something I like. Technically, it's just not open right now. There is no way, but that's exactly what I was like considering. Like in easy case, if you want to interact with Talos internals, basically you can like create, like Talos, what it does today, it gets the machine configuration, gets data from DHCP, whatever kernel command line, and based on all of that, it creates internal resources for network components like assign, address, this and to that link. But system extension can technically do the same, and I think Masood was like, is saying I want to control devices at IPs and routes. So at the moment, you can do this directly by interacting with the Linux kernel, like FRR pod does. It runs BGP daemon and will like just interact with the Linux kernel directly. That works because Talos won't touch anything it's not managing itself, right? So if it doesn't manage that address or that link, it won't touch it. It will let you do whatever you want with that. But in the future, we'll like open this way so you can basically use Talos network subsystem to set up things so you have visibility and stuff like that.
So there's another question. Is the Sidero team considering future first-class support for Cilium either as a default or an optional CNI? Currently, the support to Cilium support to Cilium more experimental than anything. So in Talos itself, we'll probably stick with flannel because that is pretty. I mean, it's hard to make flannel not work. I think we ran into something strange the other day where in VMware it didn't like the encapsulation method used by Flannel by default, that was tricky to hunt down. But one of the things we've been talking about internally actually is having Omni deploy Cilium by default. Ah, Ethan, yeah, you were there.
Yeah, we switched to Calico with VXLAN, I think, right?
I think it does VXLAN by default. Maybe, yeah, you guys know better than me.
I don't remember.
We track it down, and I was like, okay,
did something.
I'm done.
Yeah.
But Andre, you and I have been speaking about having Omni actually deploy Cilium, because there's all kinds of, like, as we found out today, and I was reminded, like, you can actually do all that load balancing stuff with Cilium now that Metal B offers, and there's all kinds of cool things that we can do. And it seems to be a popular combination to want to run Talos with Cilium. Funny enough, you'd think, no surprise there, right? People running a bleeding edge or more modern operating system always also wanting to run a modern CNI stack. So I think we'll probably see this come into Omni eventually, to answer your question, Taylor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're like pointing out too that Noel's been doing a bunch of extensions of like testing Cilium and making that play better and work better with Talos.
Yeah, we have documentation. It's currently in Talos 1.4, but it will work with 1.3 version as well, which documents extensively, I think, 6 or 8 ways you can run and deploy Cilium.
Yeah.
They all work. But more technical reason we don't want to include Cilium into the base Talos is that, one, it has like so many ways you can configure it that we can't make everyone happy if we just include like a single version of it. That's what on one hand, right? So people will certainly want to customize that. And if you want to customize that, that will be something which will probably go out of scope of minimal Talos operating system, because we'll have to bundle things like Helm and orchestrate Helm upgrades across control plane nodes and stuff like that. Flannel is way more simple. That's why we rather stick with that as a default. But we love Cilium, we love Calico, we love all CNIs. It's just the Flannel seems like a perfect fit for a default.
It's the CSIs that we don't like.
Yeah. But really, like on a higher level orchestrator like Omni, installing, upgrading, managing, reconfiguring Cilium seems like a perfect fit.
Let's see, a couple other. I'll moderate a little bit if that's cool with you guys.
Yeah, please do.
Next question is, that's an Andre question. Firecracker with Talos systems extensions, maybe?
So that needs some clarification. So Firecracker itself runs perfectly on Talos without any issues. I think the question is probably about Containerd Firecracker plugin, basically to make Containerd run containers under Firecracker.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly. There should be something in the issues. There was some kind of a problem with compatibility there. Probably around C groups v2. Probably it's fixed, but it's not about like Firecracker itself, but I forget the name, but that plugin that wraps it for Containerd. Firecracker itself runs perfectly if you want to use that like as a run it in a pod, for example.
Okay. Let's see. Next one. Will the APIs used by Omni CTL be documented and made public? Meaning, could we automate machines getting added to the clusters instead of clicking in the web UI?
Where are you seeing that? That's a good question. I missed that one entirely. But yes, I mean,
Andy, right in it. Yeah.
It's actually, we have something right now, which is even in the docs, probably. Andrew, you can post there a link, or I can do that. But we have a thing in OmniCTL called cluster templates, which sounds like similar to cluster API, but nothing really exactly. But that allows like a full automation in declarative way of deploying, reconfiguring, upgrading, whatever, scaling up, down, and destroying clusters. And it has a way to automate, like waiting for the cluster to reach their healthy state. So that is available. But if the question, I don't know
Tim,
if that's the question about,
we're gonna need some of that, Tim.
Yeah, right.
So I didn't talk to.
I need
Well,
some food
just to
supply.
expand on that, just to expand on that just a little bit too. One of the things that we're also looking at that I mentioned in the roadmap, which feels like yesterday by this point, is that we will be having the ability to auto join a machine to a given cluster. So you could just technically turn on Talos with the proper configuration. And with multi-doc YAML, this could be, maybe there is a YAML file that describes how to connect to Omni, and that's the only thing that you need to supply in your user data instead of today, how it's done today with kernel args. So you can turn it on, set labels, and tell it join this cluster automatically. And that could be, an auto scaling group in AWS. That could be machines being turned on via Terraform. And like I mentioned, we're going to be looking at getting native Equinix Metal integration too, where Omni itself will be able to use the token that you supply it and turn on machines for you. So I think there'll be plenty of ways to do.
Yeah, and also like the Omni API itself, right? If you don't want to use OmniCTL in any way and you want to build something on top of that, we plan to publish the client side part of Omni as an open source, so you can basically integrate around the SDK directly if you want to build, I don't know, like Terraform provider for Omni or something to that effect.
Yeah.
We'll let somebody else do the first cut of that if they want. It sounds cool though.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Crossplane provider for Omni. I've never even touched.
I'm actually a fan of like what Crossplane is doing, but I have to admit I've actually never used it. Crossplane is super interesting, making putting CRDs in front of using APIs from wherever and putting CRDs in front of it. I really like that idea, but I've actually never used it.
Yeah. If you can write plugins for it, you can probably do a new plugin.
Yeah. That's our hope, is that we release it and people can get creative, do what they want with it.
It's one of those things where it's tough for us as a company to figure out what really gets traction for people, right? Like, we've put off doing a Terraform provider forever. And then like the second we did, everybody picked it up and like really uses it.
Oh, I'm so surprised.
Just like it's hard to know like what people will use and what they won't, and it's interesting for sure.
Some of that may be our own bias, right? Like I used Terraform forever and eventually started to not enjoy it, to be polite. But now that we put it out, it's like, okay, yeah, there's still people using it now. I'm not the center of the world. What's going on? No.
Yeah. Let's see. Marshall's got a question around Omni and the ability to use private certs when self-hosting. I think this is a known issue. You have to have like legit certs when you do like if you're doing an on-prem Omni install.
The issue is the CA. So Talos currently doesn't have a way to update with the machine config your CA list. So you would need to either build a custom base image which has your private CA built in, and then you could use you could then deploy that and have that connect to your on-site onto your on-prem Omni. But by default, that CA injection is basically the only extra step you need to supply.
Yeah, we even talked about
some ideas.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talked about internally was making sure that when you like extending the ability for the imager, basically, like because we're using the imager under the hood to generate the image for when you say like Omni download media or whatever. Adding the ability to add extra certs essentially into the generated image, like at that time, and then automatically injecting the whatever Omni itself is using, right? Like maybe like. But that'll be a little bit to get that process built out, I think. But that would solve a lot of the problem.
But I would say it's coming this year because we know
ongoing. Yeah, we
air gapped is big.
Yeah, and I think folks. I mean, we touched on this a little bit a couple of times already today, but maybe pretty interesting for some of especially the on-prem Omni folks. But I mean, we are working towards that being fixed, and then we're working towards and thinking towards pre-caching the Docker images as well. so that when you turn the machine on, you're not, PowerFlex is a really good example of this from our talk earlier today. Like they ship out a box and it's got only LTE connectivity, and sometimes that connectivity sucks, right? And so pulling a couple gigs worth of Docker images is not really a whole lot of fun for them. So
and not only
pre-caching
that,
stuff
but if they ever wanted to do HA, they would need to pull that per machine. And so one of the things we're looking at too is having a distributed registry that runs within Talos so that other machines can share with each other. That in combination with the pre-cache means you just need to have one of them pre-seeded with everything, and then everything else. And then furthermore, with the distributed registry, you could have you could have it such that one of them only has to pull from the internet if you're over something like an LTE internet or something like that, save some bandwidth, some data and bandwidth over that, and then that thing can distribute it to the rest of the machines in the cluster. So things like that.
Yeah, Dinesh is asking what we were thinking about. He was asking about Dragonfly, but I don't think we settled on anything yet. But there was a project we saw the other day that was this distributed registry thing.
Yeah.
What was that called? Do you guys remember?
It's relatively new, and I don't remember the name of it, and I probably should. I'm sure I could dig it up through the Slack history.
Yeah,
and
that's interesting.
Right. I'm leaning towards that one because it kind of aligns with what we want to do, and it seems pretty small, and the project seems like we could help it, and it's just philosophically right in line with what we want to do. I don't remember. I'm sure I've looked at Dragonfly at one point. I don't remember exactly how Dragonfly differs from this one. I'm also familiar with Uber's Kraken, but that one runs off of the Tor protocol and stuff like that. It seems more fit for really, really large scale things. So yeah, we're still deciding.
There's stuff like that. Yeah, we're thinking through. I mean, air gap story and the edge story continues to be a thing, of course, and there's data concerns and there's totally air gapped, and those are both things we have to solve. So ongoing work. But yeah.
But I think if we do that, right, we want to do it like Talos way, so it should be like completely easy to enable something. You flip a single configuration value, and it just works. Because Talos already knows about the cluster membership. It knows what are the members, so it can basically automatically fan out to like all members on an image pool and see if some member already has that blob, and just fetch it from there, and that's it. So you don't have to. It's like
first one to respond.
Probably is a great example. You just enable it, and you're done. You don't need to do anything with that. So in that sense, it should be also minimal, because we don't want that certainly to run like several services like Redis, Postgres, or something else.
Yeah, exactly.
Just, like a simple job of. I'm thinking about like Harbor, for example. That seems to be like a nice project to do these registry mirrors, but to install it, you have to run like Docker Compose with like 10 containers. No, sorry, that's not. Like
it takes. I would say it takes a lot. Well, I mean, it actually takes. How do I say this? It takes a project to be very simple in order to get into Talos, because we want to maintain Talos being small and simple and easy to use, and that's kind of why we're leaning towards this project this unknown project Spencer was saying we were looking at the other day, is because it seems like the requirements are small enough that we could just integrate it into Talos in a very neat native way without having to bootstrap all kinds of day two operations after the fact, and it would just work. So it's kind of rare that we pull in something like this into Talos, but this is badly needed, I think.
Yeah, Dinesh says he's willing to do most of the work for us, so that's good. No, just kidding.
Cool.
Yeah, Marshall has a command like library registry, that the one which provided by Docker. That is actually cool. I like it a lot, and I always have a like dream, or like a project that I'm putting. Always like don't have time for that, but if we fix it to support multiple upstreams, which should be super easy to do, that would be a perfect caching mirror. That's it. It's lightweight. It doesn't need any configuration. Literally, we can make it 0 configuration. I'm not talking about something which runs in Talos, but something you can put outside of Talos just as an optimization. That's my registry mirror, which caches everything and saves the bandwidth anyways. That's it.
Kube image keeper. Quick.
That's cool.
Looking into this now. There's so many little projects out there. It's so hard. It's so easy to miss them.
Yeah, but also we probably want something which runs lower level, because not only Kubernetes pulls the images, Talos pulls them as well.
Yeah.
Like it pulls the installer itself, it pulls the kubelet, it pulls etcd. So we have some stuff like system extensions. So we'd rather, like, Talos is all based on container images in the end, and we want that to
That's actually a great point. I mean, there's nothing stopping us from having your whole system be able to be distributed, some distributed cache of images, and that's
we
really good point.
We'll just configure containerd basically to look first for something which can like return it an image if it's already there. Might be interesting.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, the caching is pretty basic, as Nika says, but it's the caching and then distribution of around the cluster internally as a preference. I think
it's tricky. I mean, you can put a simple HTTP cache in front, but what these registries are doing is something cool. When you have a tag moving, like pointing to actually another image, what they do, they always do kind of a head request verifying that tag still points to the same blob, and then they can use like cached blob for it. So I know it's not something that people should always be doing, but these moving tags is a thing.
We can't rule it out, to Justin's point in his talk.
Cool. We've got Uku found our unknown project.
Spiegel. That's right.
Spiegel.
I think it's Mir in like Swedish or something.
But yeah, so those are the kind of ideas we're thinking through and talking through, and haven't really done anything with it yet, but it's interesting stuff for sure. Anyone else have any other questions about about Omni, about Talos, about roadmap, anywhere else we're going? I don't know. We've still got
5 more minutes.
5 minutes, yeah, exactly. So.
We could also give everyone a break if you need it. What is next?
Next will
about
be
Cozy.
Yeah, this
will
be
Andre's talk is next.
Andre's super deep dive into Cozy.
For those of you that can stick around, it's really cool. I got the sneak peek, obviously. But
a month without your favorite food, or a month without Copilot?
I don't know. I've been using Copilot a lot more lately, man.
Copilot is cool. I like how it automates like these routine things, or how it learns. Because I was refactoring something in Talos which wasn't obvious. It couldn't be done with a simple like find replace, and I had to do like something like 25 like similar changes. And I think after the second one, it learns a lot, so you can just trust it to rewrite the code for you. That is kind of awesome. But sometimes it does pretty dumb things, so I would rather stick with food.
That's why I have really robust CI systems to catch Copilot.
I'm gonna moderate this one until Steve. He's got to answer this one. So I know this is a naughty question, but still, any promises that the company won't end up being bought and sold like the famous CoreOS, then forked in the long term?
Well, I mean, to some degree, that depends on how many people actually pay us for support or start using Omni. Because the company's got to survive as a revenue stream somehow. So that's on you guys.
Give us a reason to not sell.
Give us a reason to be able to survive as an independent entity.
I'll say this, though. I will say this. Like, I mean, and I'm sure the CoreOS folks said the same thing as well. Like, I would hate to see the legacy of Talos be burned to the ground by doing something similar. And
I mean,
we'll do all that we can.
We're
to prevent that.
all like, yeah, a big part of the reason Talos exists is because of CoreOS and that whole drama.
Yeah,
So
that's a
there's
great
a whole
point.
bunch of us that would be really upset if that's the route this went down. So yeah, I don't see that happening. I'd be really surprised if it did.
Yeah, and I don't. Yeah, everyone that works here cares about Talos and cares about the philosophy, and we're not going to go off and say, all right, we'll get bought by a company that's going to require us Talos to run a package manager that's based on RPMs. It's like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, they won't buy us for that. They know. I believe that they know that they're going to buy us because the base that we have believes in what we're doing, and we've actually done some research on this, and there's people, our community strongly believes in what we're doing.
Yeah,
so
the philosophy and architecture. So you're not going to buy this company and then strip out the architecture, which kind of is what happened to CoreOS when they got purchased by Red Hat. I mean, they kept some degree of their immutability, but they did have to put on RPMs and package managers and a whole lot of overhead, which makes sense for Red Hat, but doesn't make sense for the CoreOS users, for those that want to keep that purity.
We just got to make sure we say no to IBM, Red Hat. Well, I say no. And how many more?
Yeah. There was another question that scrolled away. Supply chain attacks. Derivative images. How do we secure them?
The baking identity information into Talos, that one?
I think that's about Omni.
Yeah, that is about Omni. So, yeah, and like Rancher OS, which Susie killed, exactly. So, as I mentioned in our roadmap, one of the things we're going to be doing with Talos in 1.5, hopefully, is introducing the notion of multi-doc YAML, which means Talos, in theory, can be aware of more or less arbitrary configuration as long as some controller running on it knows how to deal with it. But you won't have to supply the rest of the configuration. So in theory, we could have something that describes how to join Omni, and you supply that within the user data rather than baking in the identity information into the image. And then from there, we can
lose Andrew.
Andre, and then supply.
Andre, you got to go join your session.
Yeah, but Andrew was going to say we can use generic or like the vanilla Talos image and just provide the identity information as a document to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But let's all go off to Andre's session. Merchandise store. Ooh, good question.
It's time for a pivot.
You wouldn't know what I had to go through just to get the t-shirt.
Yeah.
Had to come work here just to get a t-shirt.
And I still don't have a hat either.
Yes, the hats. The hats are super popular. We got to do a run of these. A limited edition TalosCon 2023 version, I think. All right. We'll see you guys at Spencer's Talk.
Yeah. See y'all. No, my talk. I'm out. I'm done.
I mean, Andre's talk.